Okay guys, in this video what we're going to do is talk about doing Lewis dot structures, but in this case we're going to do a little bit different method. Not that the other method that is in videos for us is a poor method, that one works just fine. But this way adds a little bit more math to it, which then can help you out if you want to do it that way. Okay. So in this method, what we're looking at here is using some math to figure out how many bonds we're going to put into that molecule right from the beginning. Okay. Now there is a couple issues with it. You do need to watch out for our exceptions. Okay. So when we get to the exceptions part of the unit, make sure that when we do have an exception to that octet rule, that you're able to apply that same exception to the math within this kind of video. Okay. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the other screen going through actually just a kind of a practice problem, walking through all these different steps. So let's kind of move over there. So what we're going to do a molecule, and I'm just going to make this thing up. So we're going to do, let's say, nitrogen with phosphorus, and let's say a couple of bromines in there too. Okay, so let's say that's our molecule. Now this thing doesn't exist, but it's just one that we can use to kind of build off of and do our work with this thing. Okay, so in this method, what we want to do is start with how many electrons would we need ideally for all these things to be stable. Okay, so since nitrogen, phosphorus, bromine, and iodine, and nitrogen, phosphorus, and bromine, all of those want to have 8 valence electrons. That's the ideal number for them. So the nitrogen would want to have 8, the phosphorus would want to have 8, and both bromines would want to have 8 also. Okay, so since they all want to have 8, that means ideally, if we have 4 different elements there times 8, that we would have 32 electrons that they would ideally have. Okay, now they don't have 32 electrons, so what they actually have, we want to add that up also. So the nitrogen actually has 5, the phosphorus actually has 5, and each bromine actually has 7 in it. Okay, so if we take a look, what we really have is 24 electrons to work with. Now, ideally, it would be 32, but we only have 24. So what I'm going to do is subtract these two numbers. So I'm going to take the 32, I'm going to subtract away 24 electrons from that. By doing that, that's going to tell us how many electrons need to be shared. Okay, so 32 minus 24, that is 8. So I need to share 8 electrons. Now, if I'm going to share 8 electrons, if I divide that number by 2, that tells me that I need to put on 4 bonds on this molecule. Okay, so this simple little math trick tells us right away that if they all wanted to have 8 electrons, but they only have this many, I know that the comparison between the two gives me 8 electrons to be shared, which then equals 4 bonds that we're going to have to put on this molecule. Okay, so now that we know we need to have 4 bonds, let's take a look and see, well, how many other electrons would be there. So if I have 24 electrons, that's what term down here, I had 24, and I use 8 of those electrons in the bonds, okay, if I take 24 minus 8, that gives me 16, which means I have 16 more electrons that need to be put on this molecule, okay. So I have 4 bonds plus 16 extra electrons, and that's how I'm going to build it. So let's go through the process of actually building this thing now. So we had nitrogen, phosphorus, and 2 bromines. So nitrogen was written first in the formula, so we'll put nitrogen in the center. We have a phosphorus on it, and we have 2 bromines. Again, it doesn't really matter where on the quads you put this, but you need to have them there. We've already been told that we need 4 bonds from the previous slide, and that we have 16 electrons that are not in bonds to be working with. So I'm going to put these 4 bonds on now. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. It doesn't really matter where I put the 4th one, where I double bond it at this point. We will have rules for that later on in the unit, but for now, just pick any of those to double bond. I'm going to put it here with the phosphorus just because it's the eyeball out. Okay, so it could have gone here on the bromine, that would have been just fine also, but here's I'm going to put on the phosphorus in this case. So I have my 4 bonds, so check I've done that, and now I have 16 more electrons I'm going to put on. Well, those 16 electrons, I'm going to divide that by 2, so basically I have 8 pairs that are not shared that I'm going to put on this thing to finish it up. So the phosphorus up here, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons on it. So it needs to have a few more electrons on it. Okay, so Make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. So the phosphorus there is going to have 4 more electrons, and then each of these bromines needs to have some electrons. So let's see, how many did I get? So I have 8 pairs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I put my 8 pairs on that. Okay. Now if we take a look, I have my nitrogen has 8 electrons around it. This bromine has 8 electrons around it. This phosphorus has 8 electrons around it. This bromine has 8 electrons around it. My total electrons are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So I have the right number of electrons on it. So they all have 8, check. And there's 24 total, check. So I know that I've done this molecule correctly. Okay. So that is just another way of tackling doing these Lewis structure molecules. You can watch the previous video and this video, and those two things combined can give you a lot of information on how to build these. Okay, a couple other tips or tricks to help you out to kind of end this video. You don't really want to do things with boxes or triangles and those kind of things. So we would never really do something like this where the phosphorus would bond to the bromine also in there, because those triangles are not really allowed. Other thing like that, you want to make sure that you pair everything up, so always make sure you put electrons in pairs as you work around there. And then if in doubt, try to make some things more symmetrical than not. Okay, so if you have to choose between how you build it, use symmetry as kind of a general guide to help you out also. Okay guys, that's the end of this video. Thank you for your time.